Thank you, Carol. It's always fun to come to events and people say, you talked to my first grade class when I was little, and now you're grown. It's always delightful to come and talk to friends in Murfreesboro. I feel like we're kind of all family here. But most of you remember, or some of you remember growing up in Murfreesboro when it was a really small town. And it's always fun to talk to the kids and show them that people from Murfreesboro go and do great things. You just have to do all the preparation and all the schooling and all the training to get to where you want to go. But you can get there, even to rather far away places. So I'll talk to you a little bit about my life here, my life getting to space, my space life, and then a little bit about what I've done since, and a little bit about writing the book, because that has been a really great event in my life and something that very near and dear to my heart. We will have some of the books available afterwards if you'd like to get one. They make great Christmas presents for kids and for grandkids. So if you'd like one, they're here. As I mentioned, I grew up in Murfreesboro. This is from the Daily News Journal. I am 6 years old. My baby sister is 3. And you can see that I am cutting up material. How brave my mother was to let me use the scissors at that point in my life. But I was learning how to sew, and that's something that came in handy later on in my career. But I was a typical 50s child. Thought that I would grow up to be like my mother, be a Southern belle, giving nice dinner parties, and go into dances and things like that. So that's where I thought I would be when I was growing up. When I was at Central High School, it was the high school then, I took a course in biology my sophomore year, and while everybody else thought that dissecting rats was icky, I thought it was fascinating. And so I developed a love of science and decided that I would go into some field of science. I looked around the country. My parents were a little bit strange because they wanted me to go away from home to school. My father was not from the South, and he said the South is wonderful, but there are other places in the United States, and you ought to go to one. So I found that the best school in the country in the life sciences, which is what I wanted to do, was at the University of California, Berkeley. And for those of you who remember, probably not old enough, maybe some of my front row ladies remember that in the late 60s, Berkeley was a strange place, because not only was it a wonderful school, had 27,000 students. I think Murfreesboro at the time was about 10,000. So it was a huge place, and this is not an everyday occurrence that you see on the screen. This is not students going to class. This is students protesting the Vietnam War. And so every day I had to go down through this gate, pass through these people who were advocating all kinds of crazy things. We were all hippies back then, you know, free love and drugs, and not me, but anyway, those people, and the anti-war movement and the free speech movement and the women's lib movement. It was all going on at Berkeley in the 60s. But it was a wonderful, wonderful school. And I got a degree there and applied to medical school. I was fortunate enough to get in. So, you know, this was a rather unusual time for women to get into medical school. I think girls don't understand now that back then they didn't think women should be doctors. You know, women would just take up a spot for the men, and they would never practice or do anything with their degree. And so there were usually only 1 or 2 women in every medical school class, if any. So the year that I applied, they decided, well, you know, women are, you know, trying to get into these fields. We ought to admit a large group of women this year. So in a class of 100, they took 6 women that year. That was a very large group. That's hard to believe. Nowadays, usually over 50%, over half of the people in medical school are women. They make pretty good doctors. If you've ever been to a woman physician, you know they make pretty good doctors. The other thing that I decided to do when I was there was that I decided to become a surgeon. I had worked at Rutherford Hospital, and in the summers when all my friends were out by the pool drinking sweet tea and perfecting their tans, I was elbow deep in people's guts in the operating room at Rutherford Hospital, but I learned a lot about surgery. And so when I got to medical school, that was the field that I knew a lot about. I knew that I could do some very interesting things with different kinds of surgery, and so became the only woman in the surgery residency program. That was interesting too. There were some barriers along the way. Did my internship at Baptist Hospital, huge hospital across the street from the university. And when I was in the OR, between my cases, I had to operate with somebody else as an intern. There were no women allowed in the doctor's lounge, believe it or not. Well, it wasn't a problem. They didn't have any women surgeons, and they didn't used to have any women residents. So I spent my time between cases waiting in the nurse's bathroom on a folding chair. So I decided to go across the street to the university for my residency rather than staying there. Sometimes you protest things, sometimes you ignore things, sometimes you just go around things. And that was a case where I went around things and went to a different program for my residency. But I had pretty good credentials at this point in time as I was finishing my surgery residency. I had finished medical school, so I had an MD degree. I had some work experience 4 years after that in my residency program. Somewhere along the line, I had taken flying lessons, thinking that maybe someday I'd get to be an astronaut. Some of you remember Sputnik in 1957, the first thing that orbited the Earth that was Earth-made. The Russians orbited a satellite, and then people began to go into space. And I thought maybe someday I'd have the chance to do that, even though at first they only took male test pilots, only men and only test pilots. I didn't qualify for that. So I thought that maybe someday I would have the opportunity to fly in space. So I got my medical degree and got my pilot's license. So 1977, before a lot of you were born, I found out that for the first time, NASA was going to take people for the Space Shuttle program. Space Shuttle is a big vehicle. You could take 7 people at a time, 3 people to fly the ship and 4 people to take care of whatever the huge amount of cargo was that they were taking into space to fly and orbit the Earth. So suddenly it was the right time for me. And I was just finishing my residency, so I could go do that. I didn't have children, I didn't have a practice yet, so it was a perfect time for me. So, you know, I was very lucky, but of course, the harder you work, the luckier you get. So I like to tell kids that sometimes you have to be ready when opportunity comes along. So in 1978, they named a group of 35 new astronauts, and for the first time, they took 6 women. They also took 3 African Americans and 1 Japanese American. That was unusual. They even took 2 Jewish Americans. So that was, it was just a very diverse and wonderful group. The 6 women, of course, we all had different backgrounds, but we all had to come together to support one another, because I think there were a lot of questions about whether women could make it through the training. I think at first we were all afraid that they were going to accept us, but then wash us out. They would just say, well, women can't do this. And so we had to be tough, we had to be strong, and we had to be able to get through the training, which we all did, and we eventually all flew. And this nice man I met when I became an astronaut. He was in the same class with me. This is my future husband, Hoot Gibson, who now lives here in Murfreesboro with me. I like to say I bagged a husband. This is in the 0G plane. This is not space. Married couples couldn't go into space together. But we would fly up and down in this big plane. It was like a roller coaster. And at the top of each of the hills, you got 30 seconds of weightlessness where you could test all kinds of things, equipment and experiments, and you could goof off too. So we had to learn about weightlessness, so this was one of the funny pictures. And I married that man, and a year later we became the parents of the world's first astronaut. That was a term coined by the press, and that's a child born to 2 astronauts. But I thought that was a nice title. That little boy is in his 30s now, but whenever anybody asks his claim to fame, he'll say he was the world's first astronaut. So I wanted to have a normal life, I didn't want to just devote myself entirely to a career. I wanted to have a home, a husband, a family, and was able to do that too. Of course, nothing beats your first launch. And I think of all the questions that I'm asked, one of the things that's most asked is, what does it feel to launch? Here you are sitting on the top of this rocket, 4.5 million pounds of explosives, and you know that it's going to take you 8.5 minutes to get to orbit if everything goes right. So when that shuttle launches, you feel this giant explosion way back behind you, and it feels like you're going to blow up. There's a lot of noise, vibration. You move very quickly. By the time you're at about this altitude, you're going over 100 miles an hour. So lots of acceleration. It's like if you're in a race car and you just slam the accelerator. So it's pretty scary those first few minutes. But if you're on the flight deck looking out the window and you can see all the computer screens down in front of the pilot and commander, and you can see the numbers are all counting up the way they should, it gives you a warm feeling that you are going the way you should go. Of course, the boosters are there for 2 minutes, and they make it a very wild ride. Lots of vibration, lots and lots of noise. When they come off, the engines back at the back take you the rest of the way to orbit, and they're very quiet and smooth. So when the boosters come off, you get this momentary feeling of, we've stopped. But the engines keep you going. You do feel that acceleration to space, and you get there in a very short period of time. Well, my first flight, we launched a couple of satellites. This one didn't work. We turned it out and it was spinning slowly. It was supposed to spin faster. It didn't do that. Had an antenna that was supposed to pop up. That didn't happen. So Mission Control came up with some really crazy ideas about how we might go and save that satellite. So we had to do 2 people on the flight, not me, but 2 other people, had been trained in the spacesuits, but they'd never been trained to do something like they were told to do. They were going to put some devices on the end of the robot arm. We're going to fly close to that satellite and try to hit a switch that was on the side. Now, I'm the arm operator on this flight, so I have the duty to go up and try to snag these things without catching the arm on this huge satellite rotating around and not turning it on too soon or in the wrong way, because it had a lot of explosives that were going to take it to a higher orbit. And of course, our pilot and our commander had to fly the shuttle over very close to this huge bomb sitting out there. It was a satellite. But those were things that we had never trained on before. So I think Mission Control checked things out very carefully, told us very precisely what we needed to do, and then trusted us to do it. So even though the satellite didn't get turned on, we swiped it the way we were supposed to. The switch was on the side, was already in the on position. There was something wrong with the inside of it. Mission Control thought we might be disappointed, and we said, no, we're just happy we did everything you told us to do, even though we'd never done it before, and we hadn't killed ourselves. So we were quite happy that that had happened. My second 2 flights were in Space Lab. There's a big laboratory. You're looking back at the tail of the space shuttle, and what you see in the cargo bay there is a big laboratory. It's about 23 feet long, 15 feet wide, a huge space that you can take experiments up. These 2 flights were the first of their kind because they were dedicated entirely to life sciences. How does life change in zero gravity? And that was a question that we didn't know much about. Life on Earth had always had gravity. And what happens to the human body, especially when you go up there? What are the other things that you can test that would maybe tell us why that happens to humans? We took rats, we took jellyfish. On other flights, they had taken plants. What can we learn from those things that will help us understand gravity's effect on the different things that we have here on Earth? So this looks like it might be a lot of space inside the lab, but once you get a whole bunch of people in there and you pull out all the experiments into the room, it gets pretty crowded. You'll notice that there's a lot of stuff floating, including the people. But remember, when you're in weightlessness, you have a lot of more space. Imagine if you could go sit on the ceiling, or you could go sit on the walls. The kids are all fascinated to think, gosh, if I was weightless, I could just fly up there like Superman or Superwoman. And you could You could be there, you could do your work out there, and so that's what we're doing in the lab. We're using up all the space that we can, doing as much work. This flight was 9 days, my third flight was 14 days, but testing humans. You'll see in this picture, you can't see one of the guys back there, but of the 4 subjects for all those experiments, 2 were men and 2 were women. It was the same way on the next flight, so that we were able to compare men and women. Do women adapt to weightlessness the same, better, worse? It's the same. So there were a lot of people that thought, well, maybe women won't be able to do this. We know that men have done this before. Maybe women won't be able to, but we were able to compare, and so we learned that women did the same as men, so there was no question about that in the future. Of course, if you go to space, one of the best things after weightlessness is looking at the Earth. And I love showing this picture. It is of the Middle East, Egypt, the Sinai, and the other countries over here. But to me, it is a biblical story. For those of you who read the Bible, this is the River Nile and the Delta and the Mediterranean. You remember from your Bible stories and your history of the world stories, that's where old Pharaoh ruled. You know, the pharaohs in Egypt. They had enslaved all the Jews for a period of time. Do you remember that Moses escaped and he went into a desert? This is the Sinai Peninsula, and there's the desert that Moses wandered for 40 years in. You can see it's a big old desert out there. It's too bad it took him 40 years to wander around and figure out where he was, but you can understand that it was a pretty bleak existence. But look over here. See this green area? That's Israel, and that's where Jesus lived. So right here in this picture looking out my window on the space shuttle is a lot of history of our Christian faith. So it's a wonderful story for me to be able to look out the window. Now I want you all to remember, and especially the kids, that the space shuttle just went in orbit. We didn't go to the moon or Mars, we just went around the Earth, but we went around the Earth really fast. It took us an hour and a half, 90 minutes, to go all the way around the Earth. So for 45 minutes we got daylight, we could look out and see things like this, but the other 45 minutes, it was nighttime. But nighttime was pretty interesting too. Oh, look at that. Look at all the lights, it's like a Christmas tree. But this is the country of Italy. It's shaped kind of like a high-heel boot. You see that? And if you know where all the cities are, if you know that Naples is here and Rome is here and Venice is up here, and that this is Sicily, and this is the Balkan countries, and this is the ocean where there are no people, it's wonderful to look at. It's like a geography lesson, and it's fascinating, and we flew around the Earth and looked at those kinds of lights at night, and so the nighttime was just as interesting as the daytime. So we spent a lot of time with our noses pressed up against the window. When we would bring the space shuttles back for landing, the people who had to refurbish it said we had to work really hard to get all the nose prints off those windows, because we spent a lot of time looking out at the beautiful Earth as we saw it. This is an interesting thing too. Do you see the halo up there? That's called Earth glow, and it's the lights from the Earth being reflected back out of the atmosphere. So a beautiful, beautiful picture here. Of course, we had to come home, and this is a wonderful picture that my husband took. This is my 2-year-old little boy in his flight suit that looked just like mine, watching me come home in the space shuttle. And of course, the space shuttle is a glider, was a glider, I can't say is anymore, was a glider, had no engines, no propellers, and it had to land in exactly the right place every time. It was always landed manually by the commander of the flight. Now, on my husband's first flight, he was the co-pilot. On the other 4, he was the commander and landed this and did a really, really good job. I was proud of him for doing that, and of course, when I was flying, I could look out the window and see him and my children waiting at the end of the runway, which was really nice. If you look at the book, I put this on the back cover because it's such a special photo. So we made 8 flights together. I inherited Julie when I married my husband, and I birthed the other 3. In fact, birthed this one by C-section about 3 weeks before this picture was made, which is why I look a little worn there. But we went down to Florida, and little Emily slept through the launch, she slept through the landing, she slept through everything. So we had to take her to a launch later on so she would get to see one for real. But it was wonderful. My husband had just finished his 5th flight, the first docking with the Mir space station. So we are a happy group getting all back together once he landed. We made, as I mentioned, 8 flights together. If you ever see patches like this, these are the crew patches that every crew gets to design, specific for their flight. You get to put your names on them, and that's one of the reasons that I kept my maiden name, Seddon, instead of taking my husband's name of Gibson, so I could have my name on my patch. So that's one of the reasons. The other one is I'm just kind of ornery. But anyway, we had 8 wonderful missions. The best thing about it is we got to train with 8 crews. I got to be a spouse 5 times, and being an astronaut spouse is a wonderful opportunity too. A lot of stress when your loved one is going to be the one that goes into space. But my husband got to be the spouse, the babysitter when I flew. So we traded off 1 year and then another, being the spouse or being the flyer. When I came back, I worked at Vanderbilt Hospital. I decided that I wanted to come, I think I persuaded my husband, we wanted to come back to Murfreesboro to raise our children. Having grown up here, my mother's family has been here since the early 1800s. A lot of distant cousins, not any close ones, but lots and lots of good friends here and who have been wonderful supporters since I've come back. But I did accept a position at Vanderbilt, not taking care of sick people anymore because it had been a long time since I had been through my training, but helping the medical group to be more efficient. You know, when you go to the doctor's office and you have to wait too long, or the bill comes and it's not correct, we tried to make all those things better for our physicians, but also to make it more safe for our patients. You know, doctors make mistakes too. In aviation, they used to make mistakes flying airplanes, maybe because the co-pilot would say, "Are you sure you want to do this?" meaning run into that mountain up there, and the captain wouldn't listen. So that was a problem in the airplane arena, and then we found out it was also in healthcare. So we used some principles that had been used, that I had learned about at NASA, to apply them to healthcare. So that was a wonderful thing to be able to combine my careers. After I left Vanderbilt, I helped form a company called LifeWings that taught that concept to hospitals all over the country. If you go into a hospital now, they will ask if you're going for surgery, they will ask you your name many times. And it's not because they don't know you, it's because they want you to verify it. One more time. When you go to the operating room, they will probably ask you, what surgery are you having? Not that they don't know, because they've got the schedule for the day, but they want to make sure they've got the right patient, they're going to do the right operation, and they're going to do it on the right side. So fear not. Those are the things that we have taught to healthcare. It's wonderful to know that we are making things safer for patients in case I have to go in the hospital or my family does. But there came a time when I was tired of traveling all over the country talking to hospitals, left the day-to-day operations of that company to the others, and started finishing a book. You'll see the date up there is December of 1993. I left NASA in 1995, worked for NASA another year till 96. What's 93? 93 was when I began to realize I was probably going to leave NASA, and if I was going to ever write a book, I needed to write stuff down. So I went into the mode of just spewing everything I could remember on legal pads, sitting in the carpool lane, going on those driving vacations at Christmas time. Every chance I could, sent my kids off to camp and wrote, went down to a friend's condo in Florida and wrote. So wrote everything I could remember in the context of raising a family and still having a job. Those things sat in a box for a number of years. I was driving back and forth to Vanderbilt, then traveling all over the country. What do you do with the stuff that you've written down? It was a good story. It was a unique story. Nobody had a story like mine, but what was I going to do with it? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how that book happened, because some of you may think I wonder if I could do that. Or I have some notes, I wonder how I would make it into a little book. It doesn't have to be a big book. One of the things I found, I thought, well, maybe I'll take a creative writing course at MTSU. I found something called the Writers Loft. They support people who are writing, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, anything. What it is that you sign up for it, you go for a weekend each semester, learn all about writing, meet writers, you get assigned a mentor, and over the next semester you turn in a packet of your writing, it gets critiqued, you get a chance to talk to the person who is your mentor, they help you do that. So one of my reasons was I have to get stuff off these legal pads and onto the computer. So that was my goal, and I also wanted to make something that was mostly just the chronology, the timing of everything that happened. How do I make that into a good story? There are lots of good storytellers at MTSU, and if you're thinking about writing something, go over there and talk to some of them because they do a great job. After 3 semesters, you can get a writer's certificate. Well, I didn't have it finished after 3 semesters, so they let me stay for another 2 semesters. So it took me 5 semesters, so you have to remember sometimes it takes slow people a little more time than others. But in 2010, I was able to get my writing certificate, and I had the whole book on the computer. I dabbled a little bit in writing. I had the opportunity. Some people asked me, would you write a little article for our magazine? Would you help write a little children's book? Someone else wrote it, but I helped edit it. So there was a little children's book for schools, some things. I happened to meet a young man who featured me in his literary magazine. He asked me to send an excerpt, send me a short portion for the magazine. I did. And he said, that's really great. Would you mind if I edit it? In other words, it's pretty good, but I think I can make it better. He did such a great job, he edited the whole book. Not that he changed anything, but he made the wording better, okay? He would say, you've said this, what if you said it this way? So he helped me that way, not really a ghostwriter, because it was my story. And frequently I had to explain some of the technical aspects to him so he would know that that's correct, because he didn't understand it. But he was a wonderful helper in turning a pretty good story into a little bit better writing. So I was fortunate. I'd like to say that there are angels that come along just when I need them. He was one of my angels. And then I had an epiphany. You know what an epiphany is? It's kind of like a sudden realization. Well, it wasn't really a sudden realization. I ran into a company called Epiphany Creative Services. Wonderful folks who knew how to take people from an idea for a book to a book, and told me all the things I had to think about, all the things I had to plan for, and how I was going to do this. It really pushed me to do it. In other words, do you have a big occasion coming up? Yes, I'm going to be inducted into the Astronaut Hall of Fame in May of 2015. And she says, well, we have to have a book by then. I thought, oh, that's like 8 months from now. We got it done. We had our first book signing the day before I left to go down to Florida for induction into the Astronaut Hall of Fame. This is my book team. Over on the left, Stephanie Huffman is the big boss. She knows everything about publishing. She talked me through everything. She told me what I needed to do to get a book into print. These are her helpers. She has wonderful interns and then people that come to stay to work with her, young people who understand social media and all that kind of stuff that us old people don't really know about but need to. But anyway, a wonderful group of people that taught me so much and helped me get the book done. I decided I was going to self-publish. You can either go with an agent and a publisher who will take care of everything for you, but they also take your book, they take all the rights to your book. And I wanted to be kind of in control, at least here at the beginning, so I could make a really nice book, so I would be proud to send it out to all my friends in Murfreesboro. I had to create a logo for my publishing company. So this is Your Space Press. The astronaut symbol is a shooting star through an oval of orbit with downcoming flames. You'll see that I modified it just a little bit with a woman's symbol, right? So I made the oval and then made one of the downgoing flames into a bar also. So it's a little play on things. I thought maybe some of my astronaut friends would be a little upset about it, but they liked it. So anyway, there's my logo. It's on the side of my book, and now you know the secret of how it was designed. Next of all, once I had the book already, and it had been laid out, I had to decide, what's the cover going to look like? Well, I had been thinking about this book for many years, and so I kind of had an idea. The guy that was going to do the cover art for me said, what do you want it to look like? And I say, I know exactly what I want it to look like. I want you to take a picture of me in space and make it a book cover. He says, well, I guess we can see. So I'm going to show you the picture we started out with. There I am, my first flight. Not a great picture, a little too dark, but it's weightless. You can see from the hair, and you can see a very important thing that I took with me on the flight, a bumper sticker from UT. So I said, Roy, can you make a book cover out of that? He says, well, I don't know, but I'll give it a try. So we went through several iterations, making it better and better each time, and here's what we came up with. So I think it turned out pretty nicely. Although I have people that come up to me, and when I show the picture and don't tell them the story, and they say, how did you know the title of your book in 1985? Thinking that I had decided already. I said, well, Photoshop can do anything. And so there I am with my bumper sticker made into a sign. But it was certainly a journey for me. It gives me an appreciation for people that write books, all these wonderful things in the library. I'll have to tell you that I had a library card back. You saw me at 6 years old playing surgeon with my doll clothes. I had a library card. My mother was an avid reader. She would order all kinds of books, read them, and then donate them to the Linebaugh Library. So I'm a supporter of libraries. I think they're wonderful opportunities. They do so much more now. They've got so much online. So I'm appreciative. And I will donate one of the books to the library so people will be able to read it in years hence. But you know, when you write your story down, your story lives forever. If you don't write something down about your life, people won't know. My mother died when I was 28. I didn't get to ask her a lot of questions, and she didn't write anything down. I have a friend whose mother wrote just a few things about what Murfreesboro was like in the 1860s, 1870s. You know, that's a treasure. So remember, even if you don't want to write a book, you don't want to have it published, you can write a letter and give that to your kids for Christmas if you don't get my book. You can give that to your kids or grandkids or put it in a lockbox so that people will know what life was like, everyday life. They won't want to know, you know, the history of the world. They'll want to know, what did you do and why did you do it? How come you did this kind of work? How come you did this kind of volunteer work? So I encourage you to write something down. Even kids can write about what it's like to be in such and such a grade. And leave that someplace with your parents so that you can read it later on. You'll think, oh man, I didn't know much, but your kids will love it. So I encourage you to write. Read. Have your kids read. You know, that's the best way to get to be smart, is to do a lot of reading. I think you'll agree.